Racist bikers mess with black veteran at bar, but his next move stuns everyone. The Harley's roar echoed through the quiet town of Boulder Creek as a gang of bikers pulled into the gravel lot of Rusty's Tavern. It was one of those old roadside bars, its weathered wood panels and neon beer signs drawing locals and travelers alike. Tonight, however, the atmosphere inside was tense. But before we dive into what happens next, I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from today? Drop a comment below. At the bar counter sat Mark William, a 70-year-old black veteran, nursing a glass of whiskey. His posture was straight, his hands steady. Years of discipline honed in the military hadn't left him, even in retirement. His face, marked by age and wisdom, carried a calm resolve that hinted at a life of resilience. Mark was new to the area. After decades of service, including 2 tours in Vietnam, he'd settled here, seeking peace in the countryside. The local bar had become a quiet place for him to unwind. But tonight, the quiet wouldn't last. The bikers stormed in, their leather jackets and heavy boots filling the space with a swagger that demanded attention. At their head was a burly man named Daryl, whose reputation for causing trouble preceded him. The gang's laughter and jeers immediately disrupted the bar's laid-back vibe. Daryl's eyes scanned the room and landed on Mark. He nudged one of his crew, smirking. "What's a guy like him doing here?" The others chuckled, their disdain obvious. Mark ignored them, focusing on his drink. He'd faced worse than a group of loud bikers. Daryl sauntered over, leaning against the bar. "Hey, old man," he sneered. "This ain't your kind of place. Why don't you find somewhere else to sit?" Mark looked up, his expression neutral. "I'm just here for a drink. No trouble." But Daryl wasn't looking for peace. "Trouble? Nah, we just don't want this place to lose its charm. You know what I mean?" The room went silent. Other patrons shifted uncomfortably, afraid to intervene. Mark set his glass down and turned fully to face Daryl. His voice was calm but firm. "Son, I've been through wars. I've fought for this country so that people like you have the freedom to do what you're doing right now. But that doesn't mean I'll tolerate disrespect." Daryl laughed mockingly. "Wars? What wars? Don't tell me you're one of those Vietnam guys. Thought they sent the good soldiers, not scraps." Mark's jaw tightened, but he stayed composed. His voice dropped to a low, commanding tone. "You think serving your country is something to mock? I've seen men like you crumble under real pressure." The bartender, a younger man named Jimmy, finally spoke up. "Daryl, maybe you should leave the guy alone. He's just here for a drink." But Daryl wasn't done. He leaned in closer, trying to intimidate Mark. "Why don't you prove you're as tough as you say? Or are you just an old man hiding behind stories?" Mark sighed, then stood, his full height catching Daryl off guard. Though 70, Mark's military training and disciplined lifestyle had kept him fit. His broad shoulders and steady gaze made it clear he wasn't easily rattled. "You want me to prove something?" Mark asked, his voice unwavering. "Fine, let's go outside." The bikers erupted in laughter, assuming the veteran was about to embarrass himself. The entire bar followed them into the parking lot, curious and uneasy about what would happen next. Mark calmly walked to his old pickup truck and opened the back. He pulled out a large duffel bag and unzipped it. Inside was a neatly folded American flag, a pair of well-worn combat boots, and a collection of medals, including a bronze star and a Purple Heart. The crowd murmured in astonishment. Even Daryl's bravado faltered as he stared at the undeniable proof of Mark's service and sacrifice. Mark held up the flag. "This flag represents everything I fought for, everything I bled for. It represents the freedom you take for granted every time you open your mouth to spout hate. I've seen friends die under this flag. I've carried their bodies so people like you can stand here today, free to mock what you don't understand." The crowd fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Mark stepped closer to Daryl, his eyes locking on him. "If you think strength is about how loud you can yell or how many people you can intimidate, you've already lost. Strength is standing for something bigger than yourself, even when it's not easy." Daryl shuffled uncomfortably, his gang looking at him for direction. But for once, he had nothing to say. Mark's voice softened. You don't have to like me. But you will respect what I've done for this country. And maybe, just maybe, you'll learn to respect others along the way." Without another word, Mark packed up his duffel and returned to the bar, leaving the crowd stunned. The bikers hesitated before quietly leaving, their earlier bravado completely gone. Back inside, Jimmy poured Mark another drink on the house. "That was something," he said, his admiration clear. Mark nodded, his expression calm. Sometimes people just need to be reminded of what matters. The bar returned to its usual chatter, but the story of the black veteran who stood his ground that night would become a legend in Boulder Creek, a reminder of the courage it takes to face ignorance with dignity and the power of a quiet, unwavering resolve. As Mark sat back down at the bar, the atmosphere inside Rusty's tavern was markedly different. Conversations resumed, but they were subdued, almost reverent. People who had once avoided looking his way now cast him glances of respect and curiosity. Mark, however, didn't seek their approval. He sipped his drink, content to let the lesson he'd just delivered sink in. Jimmy, the bartender, leaned over the counter, unable to hide his admiration. "Mr. William," he began, his voice low but sincere, "I had no idea you were a veteran. The way you handled those guys, that was something else." Mark smiled faintly, shaking his head. "It's not about handling anyone, son. It's about standing firm. Bullies like Daryl, they thrive on fear. You show them you're not afraid, and they lose their power." Jimmy nodded thoughtfully. "Well, you definitely put him in his place. But do you think he'll learn anything from it?" Mark's gaze grew distant, as if looking into a memory. "Maybe, maybe not. People like him don't change overnight. But sometimes planting the right seed is all it takes. The rest is up to them." As the night went on, a few patrons approached Mark to thank him, some for his service, others for the courage he'd shown. A middle-aged woman named Linda, who owned the diner down the road, sat beside him, her voice filled with admiration. "My father was a Vietnam veteran too," she said. "He passed a few years ago, but seeing you stand up like that reminded me of him. He used to say the same thing, that the fight isn't always with fists, but with integrity." Mark nodded. "Your father was a wise man. It's something we learn out there in the worst of circumstances. Violence doesn't win wars. It's the strength to endure, to hold on to your values that does." Just then, the bar door creaked open. Everyone turned, half expecting the bikers to return. Instead, it was an older man in a sheriff's uniform, his badge glinting under the dim light. Sheriff Tom Daniels had been a staple of the town for decades, known for his fairness and level-headedness. "Mark William?" the sheriff asked, his deep voice carrying across the room. Mark looked up, a hint of wariness in his eyes. "That's me. What can I do for you, Sheriff?" Tom approached, tipping his hat slightly. "Word travels fast in a small town. Heard about what happened out there tonight. I wanted to make sure everything's all right." Mark chuckled softly. "Everything's fine, Sheriff. Just a little misunderstanding." Tom's brow furrowed. "Misunderstanding or not, I don't take kindly to folks being harassed in my town, especially someone who's done as much for this country as you have. Daryl and his crew have been a problem for a while. If they give you any more trouble, you let me know." Mark nodded appreciatively. "I'll keep that in mind, but I think they've got the message, for now at least." As the sheriff left, the respect for Mark in the room deepened. People began to realize that he wasn't just a veteran. He was a man who embodied the very principles of courage, humility, and resilience. The next day, the incident became the talk of the town. Daryl and his gang were noticeably absent from Rusty's and other local hangouts, their bravado seemingly deflated. Rumors circulated that Daryl had been avoiding public places out of embarrassment. Meanwhile, Mark's quiet heroism had sparked something unexpected. Linda, the diner owner, suggested hosting a Veterans Appreciation Night at her restaurant. "It's long overdue," she told Mark when she pitched the idea. "People around here need to be reminded of the sacrifices veterans like you have made." Mark initially hesitated. "I didn't stand up to those bikers for recognition, Linda. I just did what needed to be done." "I know," Linda said, her tone earnest. "And that's exactly why people need to hear your story. It's not just about you, it's about reminding everyone of what real strength and honor look like. Reluctantly, Mark agreed. When the night of the event arrived, the diner was packed with locals. Other veterans from the area came to share their stories, creating a sense of community that had been missing for years. Mark was the last to speak. Standing before the crowd, he shared not only his experiences in Vietnam, but also the lessons he'd learned about resilience, forgiveness, and the importance of standing up for what's right. "We live in a world where it's easy to be divided," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "But we all bleed the same. We all fight our own battles. And at the end of the day, what matters is how we treat one another." The crowd erupted in applause, and for the first time in years, Mark felt truly at home. As for Daryl, the bikers' leader found himself ostracized from the community. Unable to escape the shame of his actions, he eventually sought out Mark to apologize. The meeting was tense but ended with a handshake and a lesson learned, one that Mark hoped would stick. Life in Boulder Creek moved on, but Mark's quiet act of defiance that night became a turning point for the town. It wasn't just a story about a veteran standing up to bullies, it was a story about what it means to lead with dignity and how one man's actions can inspire an entire community to be better. Leave a comment if you enjoyed this story. It doesn't cost you anything and you'll make me very happy. Thank you, and I look forward to your like.